Well, hello everybody. This is Allan Starling welcoming you back to another episode of Restoration. I see we have our new curtain here, so back again. So let's bring it up and introduce Restoration, the Nehemiah story, part 4. Well, what's happened so far? Well, God helps Nehemiah get permission from Artaxerxes to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls. The district governor, Sanballat, is displeased that Nehemiah is helping the Jews. He's also trying to get a lot of other people on his side. Nehemiah gives the city leaders a pep talk, and they agree to rebuild the walls with enthusiasm. The opposition stiffens, but Nehemiah says, the God of heaven will help us succeed. All right. Now, Nehemiah had now experienced everything. He'd heard about it. He'd traveled there. He'd seen it face to face. He'd seen the opposition. He'd talked to the city leaders, but maybe he still wasn't sure. He could have said something like this or thought to himself, now that I've seen the scope of the job, I can tell it's impossible. It didn't look so bad when I was 1,500 miles away. And let's face it, these people have been here 13 years and they've done nothing. Why should they change now, even though they said they would? And then the local officials are against the idea. The job is hard enough without them to deal with. And what was I thinking? Things were so nice back in Persia. I had a cushy job. I had a nice boss, Art. So why on earth did I leave? And the king wants me back in Persia. So what am I doing here? And this whole business, it's way out of my comfort zone. I'm a cupbearer, not a contractor. Well, he didn't think. He may have thought some of those things, but didn't write them down. So we're just guessing. So let's put all aside that guessing and second guessing and see what really happened. Well, opposition was starting, and the enemy had a strategy. Did you know that our enemy has a strategy? The enemy, Sanballat and Tobiah, for instance, they had 5 strategies to defeat Nehemiah and to stop the building of the wall. Yes, the first one was mockery. We'll see that in a moment. The next one was attack. And thirdly, they tried to distract him. Then they tried intimidation, and finally, manipulation. Yes, the enemy is smart, and when one of his things don't work, he tries another. But let's look at the mockery part. Sanballat, Nehemiah writes, was furious when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews. Now, Sanballat, I think we've already mentioned that he was the district governor, but he was also an in-law of the high priest and a practicing Jew. Very strange. He was furious. Why was he furious? Because the king had taken away his authority. He's in charge of all this mess, and he's happy as long as he's in charge. And then this man comes along and says, the king has given me authority to rebuild the walls. And then he was contented as long as the city was in a mess and the Jews were demoralized, he could handle them. He wasn't interested in them at all. He wasn't doing things for their benefit. Everything was for his benefit. And then notice Nehemiah says, we were rebuilding the wall. He's identifying with the people. He's not saying I was doing the wall or they were doing the wall. We were doing it together, and it was a team effort. None of them could have done it by themselves. And then he mocked, and The reason why he mocked was because that's all he could do. He couldn't take official action. He couldn't say to Nehemiah, I'm sending you back to where you came from, because Nehemiah had thoughtfully asked for letters from the king. And was Nehemiah glad that he could show those letters and not being turned back? So he mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Sumerian army officers, he says, what does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can build the wall in a single day by just offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think they can make something out of stones from a rubbish heap, and charred ones at that? Well, friends, that's called restoration. And God is an expert at restoration, not only restoring people, but also restoring things like walls. Well, somebody else took courage now to mock. It was Tobiah, the Ammonite. He was standing beside him, and he remarked, that stone wall could collapse if even a fox walked on the top of it. And you could hear him chuckling away, and you can hear the others around him chuckling and making fun of the Jewish people who are about to start building this wall. Try to get it stopped before it even starts. Well, Sanballat spoke in front of his friends, and he got others on his side, and as we'll see, he kept getting more and more people on his side, even army officers. And then he mentioned the feeble Jews. And you know, there was an element of truth in that. They certainly were feeble. They'd been there for 13 years. They were in disgrace. They were demoralized. And saying, well, what are these feeble Jews going to do? Every effective lie has some truth in it. And when he said that, it did have some truth in it. You know, the news media are very good at that. They will take something that's true, but it's only just one side of the story or one little part of a bigger story, and make that represent the whole. And you see a little sliver and you jump to the wrong conclusions. Well, that's what they were trying to do here. And then he said, think they can make something out of stones from a rubbish heap? Well, remember when the World Trade Center was demolished? They just had to take all the rubble and just move it away and get rid of it and start over. But Nehemiah didn't have that privilege. He had to get going and use what he had. And he knew that God could make something out of nothing. That's called restoration. Did I say that before? Yes. Well, I'm repeating it because repetition is important when you're trying to make a point. That's called restoration. Tobiah, interestingly enough, was another practicing Jew. And he's the one that's pouring this ridicule on the people. And it's been true over the years, and still true, that religion fights against God. The people that Jesus said the most derogatory things about were the scribes and the Pharisees, because they were representing religion that was fighting against God. And we have a lot of Pharisees in our midst today, too, who are fighting against Jesus Christ and his church. Well, this whole incident provoked another prayer from Nehemiah. And we've seen that Nehemiah prayed many times. He prayed a lot. Now, I want to warn you, this prayer is a bit different from the one that we looked at last week. Let's have a look at it. Hear us, O our God, for we are being mocked. May their scoffing fall back on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. In other words, let them experience what we've been experiencing. They have provoked you to anger here in front of the builders. They have provoked you to anger here in front of the builders. Notice he says, we are being mocked. And then he says, they provoked you to anger. So what he's saying is, they may be mocking us, but they're really provoking God to anger. Now we have to remember when we read this prayer that Nehemiah was in the time of law rather than the time of grace. And so he's praying that these people will suffer the same thing that his people have suffered. Now, in the time of grace, what did Jesus do? He said, God, Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they do. And Jesus told us to pray for our enemies, not in the way that Nehemiah did. So he was a good example and a not so good example. But the thing was, he just told God what was on his heart. And sometimes that's all we can do. If we feel a way about something, we can't go to God and fool him and pretend we're feeling a different way. Lord, this is the way I feel, and if it's wrong, forgive me. Well, at last the wall was completed to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm. Now, I found out that this word enthusiasm in English has roots in Greek, and two words, en and theos, or theos, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But it means God is in me, or God is with me. And when you know that God's with you in a project, you can work with enthusiasm. Well, that strategy didn't work so well, so they try a different one, attack, or the threat of attack. So Nehemiah continues, but when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the work was going ahead and that the gaps in the wall of Jerusalem were being repaired, they were furious. Now notice that the opposition is increasing. Sanballat has got other people, the Arabs, the Amorites, the Ashdodites, all on his side, and they're all coming against the Jewish people who are trying to build this wall. They all made plans to come and fight against Jerusalem and to throw us into confusion. But we prayed to our God and guarded the city day and night to protect ourselves. Now let's just have a look at modern day Israel here. There's Israel, that tiny little place in the middle on the shores of the Mediterranean. And look at this, surrounding them are Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Oman, Yemen, and there's probably several others we didn't mention. And their one goal is to get rid of Israel, wipe them off the face of the map. And so far, this tiny nation has held its own against all these other people around them. Well, not only did he have problems from without, now he's got problems from within. Then the people of Judah began to complain. You know, they were quite good at that, weren't they? I mean, we read several times in the Old Testament about the Jews complaining. Poor old Moses, they really complained to him a lot. Well, maybe it was justified this time. They said the workers are getting tired and there is so much rubble to be moved. We will never be able to build the wall by ourselves. True, but they weren't thinking right. I like doing jigsaw puzzles, and I've sometimes done one with 1,000 pieces and some with 2,000 pieces. And most people start the same way as I do. You get all the edge pieces out and put the perimeter of the puzzle up. And that doesn't take that long. You feel, yes, I'm getting something done. Then you look in the picture and you see several things that stand out. You find the pieces for that, put them. But then as the puzzle begins to take shape, I find that I get like halfway through and all of a sudden I get discouraged. Now, I can't do the puzzle all day. I have to do it before breakfast or after supper. And so I'm getting after supper, I'm looking at the puzzle and I can't find one piece. Oh, I'll never get this done. I go to bed, have a good night's rest, and early when I get up the next morning before breakfast, I have a look at the puzzle, and all of a sudden the pieces start falling into place. So when you get halfway through a project, don't get discouraged. Look to the Lord. Well, the Jews who lived near the enemy came and told us again and again, they will come from all directions and attack you. So Nehemiah had problems from without, he had problems from within, and he had constant rumors. But what is he going to do? Well, it's time for practical action and another pep talk. So Nehemiah continues, I placed armed guards behind the lowest parts of the wall, and I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord, who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. So what's he saying here? He's trying to help them to change their focus. Saying, don't focus on what still needs to be done. That would be very discouraging. But focus, and don't focus on your enemies. Now, we are told to be alert, to be ready, to be on the defense. We can't just ignore our enemies, but we don't want to focus on them. We don't want them to consume our thoughts day and night. But he says, instead of doing that, whenever the Bible tells us not to do something, they tell us what we should be doing, what can replace that thing that we're doing wrong. But focus on these two things. Focus on our great God and focus on your families. So, what's our choice? And what is your focus? What's my focus? What keeps us awake at night? Is it the enemies or is it our great God? Nehemiah knew exactly what he had to do, and he tried to help the people to see that. All right, time for take home. Last week we had a whole lot of take home. Today there's just one. Focus, 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 focus. Focus on our great God. Yes, we have to deal with our problems. We don't completely ignore them. We don't put our head in the sand, but we focus on our great God. So let's put that in our takeaway box. And next time we have progress. So let's ring down the curtain on another episode of Restoration, the Nehemiah story. And may God bless you, and may you have a great week.